the notion of needing to have a home before you could welcome people into it. I've seen quite a lot of videos online of the response of communities in rural Ireland where there have been plantations. And I think that sounds like a very strong word, but you can see aerial footage of big construction sites where large numbers of migrants who are being bussed in and flown in the various international agreements are being housed and put up against the will of the locals who don't want this. They're primarily young men who are joining or coming to the country from all over the world. These facilities are being guarded by the local police force, and you can see that people feel betrayed, that they never had an option, that they've just got to go along with it and accept it. And we're starting to see that in Britain too. There are videos coming out of council meetings where people are questioning the housing of large numbers of the asylum seekers that have come over on the small boats in hotels, sometimes near schools, being whole hotels being rented out and then being guarded by immigrants themselves. And what's quite interesting is linking all of this. I'd like to get your view on British and Irish relations in the wake of welcoming, well, not welcoming in, but receiving a great many different peoples from everywhere but, say, this archipelago that we call home. Because I saw a meme online. I mean, memes seem to spread the culture a lot these days, if that's what you can call it. But there's a meme which had a picture of an Anglo, a picture of a Celtic person, and one of them said something like Fenian, stupid Fenian, and the other one said something derogatory back about the English and the British. And then the next line was them with a bunch of people who've just arrived who are saying different things in insult to them. And then the final set being those two looking at each other saying, maybe we have more in common than we thought. And indeed, there was a big protest up in Belfast it was a pro-Palestine protest, and there were various flags being flown on that side, trans flags, Palestine flags, socialist worker flags. And on the other side, there was the Union flag alongside an Irish tricolour flag, and they were on the same team, and they were waving them together, saying, "These are the peoples of this island." Do you think there is something shifting beneath the ground there in Ireland about relations between the different peoples that have historically been part of it?
Well, you see, I think that it all depends on who you're speaking to, of course. The people, you see, you mentioned at the beginning, you've got to separate out media voices from everyday voices, ordinary voices that are not heard. You mentioned Noam Chomsky, who came up with a very nifty phrase called manufactured consent. I think that the media is always into manufacturing consent, consenting to their own ideals of the world. But the people who don't get a hearing ordinarily on official channels identify with anyone who respects home. So if there's an Irish rural person who is attached to the land, is attached to ancestry, is attached to heritage, is attached to custom, is attached to belonging, is attached to family, is attached to the homeland, they will identify with the same person no matter where they are. Now, you don't necessarily have to be rural. You can be a city dweller and see the destruction of home everywhere, because our cities are undergoing social experiments left, right, and center in all of the institutions. But you can still identify with people who hold similar values. So, those who turn their noses up at the likes of reform voters, let's say, I'm interested in reform voters. You might not be interested in reform, but I'm interested in reform voters. I want to see what type of people these are, what makes them tick, what are their local interests and concerns. And you will invariably find that they are the very same as the people who don't have a party in Ireland to represent them. There's no party of a similar ilk in Ireland currently. Minor one maybe, composed primarily of independents, but nothing of substance yet. But that will grow in time, I suspect. But nonetheless, I'm interested in that because, these are the people who hitherto have been silenced for 4 decades, and are now being heard because the political establishment has to listen because their vote is being threatened. But I'm interested not in hearing what Nigel Farage has to say, but I'm interested in hearing what his supporters have to say, because there you find the true concern. There you find the true instinct when it comes to preserving home and what that means for the British people.
Interesting. I was speaking to a politician the other day in London, not on the record, and we were talking a little bit about some of the discourse you see online when people are disappointed, perhaps when, say, Farage is now giving interviews where his tone might have softened in a few areas, but that's not what people want. But then it's on certain media channels which not every single person is watching. And the politician said to me, it doesn't really matter. We might be unhappy with that, or there might be a softening here or there, but it's a niche concern for those who are very online. But actually, go and speak to the people in the Wetherspoons or out at work, and they effectively just care about what this is, which is a vehicle to put a shot across the bows of the thing that's not working and which they've been trying to say is not working for a long time. So to them, it represents something which is the opposite to this thing which they don't like and have had forced on them for so long. And I think, Mark, bringing in Roger Scruton a little bit, he was a conservative who made the point that conservatism is not an ideology; it's a disposition. It's something which those with the disposition would, in the face of social engineering or some big policy idea, would say, or perhaps shout out, "Stop! Wait!" It's a bit like Chesterton's fence: don't remove it until you know what it's for. Suspicious of social engineers, utopians. I think it's also fair to say that conservatism has been on a hiding to nothing in the wake of liberal progressivism, Islamism, mass immigration, the rise of sectarian politics more broadly. And so I know we can never really ascribe some thoughts to someone who's no longer with us, but what do you think Scruton would make of calls that you can find, particularly on the American conservative side, that are saying it's counter-revolution that we need, insofar as it's rooting various practices and ideals out of institutions, it's stopping funding towards institutions who are undermining all of the values and the traditions, the customs you've been talking about, and it's about going after where the money is. Do you think Roger Scruton would recognise that there might be a need for a counter-revolutionary movement to root this out, or would he suggest something else?
Well, he probably wouldn't use that term, but he would subscribe to a wholesale eradication of the worst excesses of this movement. The destruction of education, for example. Education was always a primary interest of his, because he who controls the classroom controls the future of the country. And therefore, to see the degradation which is spread like wildfire through the curricula of the Western nations was devastating for him. Because you firstly, when you start messing around with and dumbing down and eviscerating and then injecting a child's curriculum with kind of this demonic, as I've referred to it before, ideology, whereby the whole construct of what it means to be human is reformulated as a benign sort of curiosity for you, to learn in the classroom. That is not something that we can take lightly and say, well, now that's an accepted part of where we are, and we can leave that. And no, you can't leave that intact. You've got to counter that with everything that you've got and show why that is intrinsically wrong, not only from a scientific perspective, but from a moral and a sociological and a religious perspective. Because once you start tinkering with things like that, and once you start tinkering with things like history, and once you start tinkering like, the famous, we thought it was bad when the famous French feminist philosopher Lucy Irigaray came out and said that Einstein's famous equation was a sexed equation. That was one often you could easily dismiss that as the kind of ravings of the cultural elite in Paris, of a certain time. But that has become the norm. So no, you don't look at that benignly. You say, no, this has to be countered because this is detaching children from their primary source, their sacred source. It's detaching them from history. It's detaching them from real culture. It's detaching them from memory. It is making them home haters, oikophobes. And so what type of future are we setting ourselves up to endure with this? So there's one example of an institution, solely education, both in the university and in the schools, which needs root and branch reform, now a robust reform. I know Donald Trump has set his sights on this, but I think that's the type of thing. I don't think Roger Scruton, calm and all as he was, would say, now check your horses a little. This needs to be done gently and lightly. No, it doesn't, because for every child that is put through that, you're setting up another disaster 20 years from now.